Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer, and yes, I am back in the old office in Los Angeles just for today. I'll be back in Austin next week, but I'm here with my good friend, Michael Wann, co-host and Susquehanna alchemist extraordinaire. How are you doing this morning, Michael?
I am doing very well today. It feels like it's been a really long time since we've spoken.
Right, I know. Sometimes it feels longer than others. Today is episode number 18. We're adults, Michael.
18. Oh, this is it?
18 of playing the glass bead game.
So we can vote now, like as a collective unit.
I don't know really what good that does us, but yes, we can vote.
I think that I'm going to put in an application for us to become a voting unit at the United Nations.
There you go.
Like, because they vote, right? I think that's how it works.
And they have a flat earth map. So, you know.
And they've got the flat, like, when I actually think about, like, I've got a picture in my mind of what I think happens in the United Nations based upon, like, what they've shown us. And then as soon as I said that, I'm like, do they vote? Like, is it a voting organization? Like, what the hell happens there?
Yeah. So, I don't know that I would trust most people's report of what goes on at the United Nations. But I have had the honor in the past of interviewing Cynthia McKinney, and I do trust what she says. I don't always trust her judgment because somehow she got tangled up with Robert David Steele, but I do trust what she says. I do think she reports things correctly. And, her experience of it was that, like, it was odd. Like on some things they were very good, and she'd go and she'd give her presentation and they'd have, I don't know if it's really a vote or it's like they take it is a vote, but I don't know that it has any legislative authority. I think it's just like forming coalitions or working groups. But I know that there are countries that participate in the UN that don't have a vote. Not all countries who participate in it or groups that participate have a vote. Some do. There's like all these little groups. I don't know.
So the people who don't get a vote, like, why are they there?
To be heard.
To be heard. But to be heard, because that, what do they call that? The general council, maybe? Like there's something like that small group, which, I would think would be the voters. Like what I'm thinking about right now is like, all of the agendas, like, agenda 21, agenda 30. Right. Like, is that just like universally like accepted? Like whatever group drafts that documentation, like, is it then just like force fed down in the same way, like you hear how like the Council on Foreign Relations and stuff like that work in these like trickle down sort of ways of like, this is what's going on. I'm going to give you guys a heads up so you can start like propagating these directives within your own.
So I think it's like everything else. Like my guess would be that there are people who are like, just like in the Congress, how like the people sit on certain caucuses or certain intelligence committees or whatever. And those people like know the nitty gritty about the bill they're working on or the topic that they're looking into or whatever. They know like the nitty gritty, and then they go and report the generals to the bigger Congress, and then the Congress goes home or comes out to the public and gives even a further watered down version of it to the people, right? So I'm assuming it's probably the same in the UN. And then there seems to be that like there's like these organizations, like, did you ever do any of the research into like ICLEI? ICLEI. I forget what that stands for, but these were like local groups, like posing as sort of like grassrootsy kind of stuff, right? But they were either completely started by or infiltrated by the UN. And it was basically going around and like making it seem like local organizations were proposing some of these Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 type of things, and then using the Delphi technique to get the local communities to do it. And they would use like they would sugarcoat shit that is green fascism as being like environmental stuff, like they always do. Yeah. But then what they would do, are you familiar with the Delphi technique?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So they would use the Delphi technique on people, but it's because that is part of hypnosis and NLP and all of that different kind
gaslighting. Of it's ultimately like it's how to gaslight people in a public environment.
Yeah. and like, so then the people would feel like they had some say in it, even if it's just like voting, right? Like this has always been my like me and my father and my sister and whatever, we have a lot of arguments about the fact that I don't vote, right? And like when Trump won, I was accused of being a Trump supporter because I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. I didn't vote for Trump either. I don't vote. And I actually told them that they were wrong. I'm like, no, actually, you guys voted for Donald Trump because when you participate in an election, you agree that the person who wins the election is going to be the president. I don't agree with that. And so I'm actually, you guys are actually the ones that voted for Donald Trump, right? But people feel that they, are participating in something and that they're exercising their rights and practicing democracy and all that kind of shit. So like they attended the ICLEI meeting, which they think is local. And like, because they don't understand the Delphi technique and it's entrancing, they feel like, well, it's not really what I want and I really don't like it, but somehow we have to obey it because the people of the community decided on it. But what I would say is that those people, whoever was running the ICLEI scam, like they got their intel directly from the inner committee in the UN that were working on this, not from the General Assembly who only knows like the shiny parts about it, but like the people who are in that core of creating that itinerary that then sort of gets glossed over in the General Assembly. They were the ones directly funding and training and coaching the people who are the ICLEI. So it's almost like the voting body gets cut out of the information, like that the information goes from like the inner core out into like almost like cells, like a terrorist organization has cells into the community, right? And it skips right over, right, the any voice of reason that might exist in the, because I don't think it's possible that every person in the government or every person in the UN is like evil. Right? Like it's not that. It is, there's a lot of them that are evil, and then there's others that are compromised and others who just don't get it, just like everything else in the world. Right. But I think that's sort of the technique that's used there. And so vote. I mean, I think it's like a lot of like voting and consensus building, things like that. Forming coalitions, forming study groups, that kind of stuff.
So I mean, this was like, I don't know, like in 2005, 2007. I remember there was a lot, I say a lot. It was big in my personal radar. It was articles talking about how Berkshire Hathaway, so Warren Buffett's company, was buying up all of these like local newspapers. Mm-hmm. And it didn't make sense based upon like, the logic which was being told and sold to the masses at the time. Or it didn't make sense to me because the narrative which was really being pushed was how like local news and newspapers were going away. Like this is like in the, early days of social media, the early days of like, internet 2.0. And why would Warren Buffett be buying up all of these newspapers if this is like going to be a dead industry? And I remember at the time, like, I was like, yeah, like, there's more to the story. But now now with everything which is unfolded since that point, and I can only really speak about my own local newspaper, and seeing how local news. I prefer to go and get a lot of like local news from the local newspaper's website. And it has become this like the biggest propaganda piece I've ever seen. Like it's become one of the when you see something which irritates you, but you can't wait to see someone do that to irritate you, like it reconfirms. They did it. So like I do that with like the local newspaper when I see like the ridiculous, like what like how they tell the story. And to my sense is like that was what all of that like acquiring of the local newspapers were in the early 2000s. But that goes hand in glove to everything which you're talking about, which is more so like on the local government. So it's like these ICLEI groups, and then coupled with like that's how you control the local government. And then with all of the local newspapers are controlled by larger corporations. And yeah, that's how we get to a place where we are right now.
So, okay. So this is how the local newspapers went away. Like my father's always been an avid newspaper reader, right?
Mm-hmm.
So every morning, after he took a shower and got dressed for work and whatever, while he was waiting for my sister and I to finish getting ready for school or whatever, he'd walk out, get the newspaper, bring it back, separate the sections. Some of the sections he took with him to work, some of them he left at home for reading, but he read pretty much the whole newspaper every day. Doesn't mean he read every single article in every section, but he pretty much read most.
What newspaper did he read? What was
Los Angeles Times,
Angeles
Times, right? And the newspaper used to be huge. It was this wide, and it was always pretty thick during the week like this, and on the weekend like this, right? And of course, on the weekend it had, the calendar, the more in-depth calendar section with activities. It had the magazine. It had the TV page.
Parade magazine.
Not Parade magazine. There's a Los Angeles Times magazine.
Oh, right? yeah. So every big market has their own, the New York Times, the Washington Post magazine, and then you'd have the Parade magazine,
and then you'd have the books,
People magazine,
the books of coupons, all that kind of stuff. So it was even bigger, right? And
I remember those days.
He read it all the time, and he also he used to save a lot of newspaper articles and clippings, and there was newspapers everywhere in our fucking house, right? And I started to notice. It started back in around the early 2000s that the newspaper started to get thinner and thinner and thinner. Mm-hmm. And then it started to get narrower and narrower. It used to be this wide, and then it started getting smaller. And I don't know, when you were in school, I went to a private school. We had this thing that we would get called the Weekly Reader. Did you ever get the Weekly Reader?
Mm-hmm. I don't know what the Weekly
Reader. Little newspaper for kids. I really liked it. It was really fun. It was good, right?
And I think I remember that.
It had word searches in it and stuff too, but a few little articles.
Yeah.
It got to the point where it was pretty small like that. The Weekly Reader was a little more like a magazine. It didn't open the same way a newspaper did, but it got shrunk down to size, almost like it was for little kids, which was part of the infantilizing the adults of America.
I see where you're going, and how the newspaper has taken on those dimensions.
Right. So it got smaller, and then. Have you ever lived when you lived in the Washington, D.C. area, did you ever ride the subway or the metro on a regular basis? Okay. So
not on a regular basis, but yeah, I've been on it.
So when I lived in New York, when you would near the subway stations or whatever, there was always these little newspapers that were just the city rags, right? But they looked kind of they were more looked like the National Enquirer, but thinner, right?
All right.
They had similar dimensions to how the newspaper shrunk down to that I was saying. And I would read them when I was on the subway, and they would generally have some local articles, maybe one or two sort of nationally stories, and then a Sudoku, a crossword puzzle, and some event listings for local goings on, just something for people to read while they were on the subway, right? But they were kind of this hybrid of National Enquirer and USA Today, right? They weren't the intellectual kind of newspaper.
Like New York Post?
Yeah. So, but New York Post was bigger. This was more somewhere.
Right. This was a little bit smaller, but how that would be the Cadillac of that type.
Between the New York Post and Weekly Reader, that's what this sort of was, right? And so all of the stuff was sort of happening at the same time. Now the newspapers seem to me kind of like those rags you used to get on the subway. And then National Enquirers now are closer to the truth, right? So I don't know, one of the things that I picked up and kind of liked from when we went through our watching the Men in Black thing is that's where they would get the lead for their stories.
Right.
Their cases, right? And so to that extent, the National Enquirer now has more verifiable information than any of the shit that's in any of these newspapers. But I watched what used to be the papers of record, like the New York Times and the LA Times, basically shrink down to the subway rags Weekly Reader hybrid kind of thing. And that's so when the local newspapers went away, it's not that they disappeared and they don't exist. It's that they were just basically turned into city rags. right? Like some sort of like entertainment, like, and like brain candy for children kind of stuff, like the Weekly Reader was, right? It stopped being in any way informative, and this coalesced with the movement of everything onto screens, the overconsumption of everything, the outsourcing of everything, including remembering people's phone numbers to your devices and things like that. It all seemed to go along like at the same time. Everything shrunk. The phone is a very small computer. The newspaper is now the Weekly Reader, right? And like, it's just, everything is, and then we got into doing like texting language. So nobody says whole words anymore. They just say LOL or LMAO or right, or whatever it is, right? It was sort of this shrinking down to size of everything to a controllable size. And that's what I'd say. So it didn't really go away. The information went away, even if the quote unquote paper remained.
Right. Yeah. And like, so a couple things, like I remember it being called something else, but I know what you're talking about, like that the children's insert, which would be in the Sunday paper. And
this wasn't in the paper. We got it at school.
We used to get it in the paper. I can't remember what it's called. It would be like where the comics were in the Sunday comics, and then there'd be like something specific for kids. Okay. So there's also like, the hypnotic triggers, and there's a lot of hypnotic triggers. You got visuals, you've got like sounds and so forth, but then there's also like the tactile. And so as you are, particularly for like our generation, for the generations which do recall what life was like in like that newspaper equal like news, it has become more tactile. Like no one's thinking that consciously, like, oh yeah, this is what I was reading when I was a child. I'm going back into this child type of mentality, being told, one of the things, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, what the few people probably, I can only speak of my local market. Like I think the amount of newspapers, physical newspapers, are much less read locally, but most people who read that paper are getting it through a screen. And they've gotten rid of, in the past year, all of the comments on the articles. Like that has gone away as well. Like you can't comment on anything. So I agree. Like I see the same trend that you do, is like this slow drip, like all things like consolidating the amount of information, whether that's like, an MP3, you're not getting all of the full spectrum of sound, to like, not the full spectrum of even the propaganda is becoming more and more sharp.
So Laura looked up the Weekly Reader, and guess where the Weekly Reader comes from?
Where?
Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio is the Weekly Reader. I remember that. I can remember this from 5th grade. Do you remember? I think it was called Dynamite Magazine.
Yeah, I love that.
Who didn't love Dynamite Magazine?
I don't remember that one. Yeah.
So it would be something which you would order through, like you would get like a Scholastic catalog, and you would check off which books you would want.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And then included on that would be Dynamite Magazine.
Okay.
And I remember that was the only thing I ever wanted to read. Like this is like 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, like that type of age. And I would love to get my hands on one of those, like from like 1984, 1985, to see exactly what it was that was so enticing to me as a child, like to look at that now. Like,
did you used to have book fairs at your school?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I went to I didn't know if they had it if you went to public schools, because I went to private school. We had book fairs. I loved the book fair, right? That was my favorite, the book fair. I loved that. And I used to like to buy the Encyclopedia Brown books. I loved Encyclopedia Brown, and I liked Mad Libs. And there was like some other thing that was like Mad Libs that you sort of filled it out and sort of create. And then I liked the Choose Your Own Adventure books, right? But I loved the book fair. Like that was
I think everyone did. I think everyone did. I think people, like, that's part of like, it's part of our human experience of like the bazaar, the fair, the like coming into town, and like you got to see all these sort of things, without a doubt. And it would be really interesting to go and put out like like a list of all of those like things that were really, really kind of popular for children in the 70s and 80s, the Choose Your Own Adventure books, the Mad Libs, Dynamite magazine, and to kind of look at that from a lens of how did that prep the mental world for the generation. The reason why it's important, at least in my opinion, is everyone who was a child in the 70s and 80s, they are at their, quote unquote, peak adult stage during this time of life. And what I mean by that, like, if you're like 40, 50 and so forth, like traditionally, these would be the people who would be running the show, like, whether it's a business or whether it's a government, because that's the age. And so this entire generation had been planted with all of these like kind of things in the background. I know I talk a lot about like the role of Scooby-Doo and the Time Life, like, unsolved mysteries, but I think that's just scratching the surface. Now might be an interesting segue, because you talked about the book fair, because I want to go bring something up as it relates to that. All right. So have you ever heard of a book series? And I think they made a movie series out of it, and it's called The Hunger Games.
Yes. I won. Hey, everybody, this is Emily, and you just watched the opening clip from Playing the Glass Bead Game number 18 with myself and Michael Wann. Today's episode was all about a game of a different sort, and it branched off into, some different directions based on that starting point. We talked about the Hunger Games, the most dangerous game, and on. It led into some interesting sort of areas to consider. We talked about Jay Parker, the ZFT, wolf energy, the body being the battlefield, various iterations of the acronym or the letters SSRI and what they could be encoding, Sacramento, schizophrenia, Regina or Regina Dugan, I don't know how it's really supposed to be said, and some of our favorite topics to throw around here in the episodes of the Glass Bead Game. Anyway, it was a really interesting episode. It was a lot of fun, and also disturbing and weird. And that seems to be the truth about our reality right now. If you can get past all the disturbing and weird, it's a lot of fun. So anyway, enjoy the episode. We will be back next week with a Project Kids episode from the road. I will be traveling. We will have a guest, and we're going to get into some pretty interesting stuff, and that will have a full publicly available segment to that one. So we look forward to seeing you next week. Enjoy your weekend. See you next time, guys. Oh, I forgot to tell you, we also have a Playing the Glass Bead Game set of merchandise available in the Project Kids Threadless shop. The link for that will be below, as well as the links to how you can join us for the entire episode and all of the content that we do. There's a variety of options. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Okay, cool. Thank you. Bye.